Alright guys, so today we are going to be starting on Chapter 9. This first section of Chapter 9 should seem a little familiar because we kind of covered it back in our factoring section. We are starting off with the zero product property. So the zero product property, remember, is just the process of factoring our polynomial. And then each of our factors that we get, we set those equal to 0 and then solve. The answer that we get is referred to as zeros or roots, and we just label it as x equals and then whatever our number is. So for these first two examples, everything is already fully factored for us, so we just have to take these factored pieces and set them equal to 0. So we will have 4t plus 1 equals 0, and t minus 2 equals 0. So we just took each of these parentheses pieces, those factored pieces, and set them equal to 0. So 4t plus 1, we need to get t by itself, so we start by subtracting 1 from both sides. So we have 4t equals -1, and then our last step to get t by itself is we have to divide by 4. So we get t equals -1 over 4. That is one answer. And then we have our other equation of t minus 2 equals 0. And we just have to add 2 to both sides to get t by itself. So we get t equals 2. And that's all we have to do. So again, in the second example, already in fully factored form, so that means we just have to set each of those pieces equal to 0. So we have 7n minus 2 equals 0 and 5n minus 4 equals 0. In this first equation, we are going to add 2 to both sides. So we have 7n equals 2. And then to get n by itself, we divide both sides by 7. So we get n equals 2 over 7. And in this other one, we add 4 to both sides. So we get 5n equals 4, and then divide both sides by 5 to get n equals 4/5. You can absolutely make those into decimals if you would prefer, since we don't really have to worry about plugging them into anything. Leaving them as fractions is also fine. Alright, so in these next few examples we have, they are not factored yet, so we have to get them into factored form. The very first step whenever we are trying to solve things by factoring is we need to have all of our numbers on the left-hand side and then 0 on the right-hand side. So in this first example we have 5x squared equals 20x. Well, we need to move that 20x to the left, so we're going to subtract it from both sides. Remember, you cannot combine that 5x squared and -20x because one of them has an x squared, the other one just has an x. So they cannot be combined, they remain two separate pieces. So we have 5x squared minus 20x equals 0. And now we can start our factoring process. Remember, the very first thing you always want to look for with factoring is a GCF. So we need to find our greatest common factor. So in this case, 5 and 20, our greatest common factor between 5 and 20 is 5. And then between x squared and x, our greatest common factor is x. Remember, when you pull out the GCF, that is dividing every piece by that GCF. So we will do 5x squared divided by 5x, which is just going to leave us x behind. And then -20 divided by 5 is -4. And then x divided by x is just 1. So that's all we have left on the inside is x minus 4. So now we take each of those factored pieces and set them equal to 0. 5x equals 0, we divide both sides by 5. 0 divided by 5 is just 0. And x minus 4, we add 4 to both sides to get x equals 4. I'm going to move down to this 3x squared equals 2x because it's very similar to the one we just did, so we're going to do that first. So again, we need that right-hand side to be 0, so we're going to subtract 2x from both sides to get 3x squared minus 2x equals 0. When you look at our numbers, we have 3 and 2. The greatest common factor that can be divided out of those is just 1. So there isn't a number that can come out, but we do have x squared and x. So the greatest common factor that can come out of that would just be x. So then that means inside our parentheses, we are left with 3x minus 2. And we set each of those equal to 0. So x equals 0, that one's nice, it just gave us an answer. And then 3x minus 2 equals 0, we will add 2 to both sides. So we have 3x equals 2. And divide both sides by 3 to get x equals 2/3. All right, so on to these other two that we have over here. So again, very first step, you have to have your right side equaling 0. Well, right now we have this 8x and this negative 12 on the right-hand side. So we need to subtract 8x from both sides and add 12 to both sides. So then that cancels everything on the right-hand side. And we end up with x squared minus 8x, and then we have 4 plus 12, which gives us 16. So then we have x squared minus 8x plus 16 equals 0. And now, hopefully, this looks very familiar from, I believe it was 2 chapters ago when we did all of our factoring. So we're going to have to make our x. Remember, the number that goes up top is this first term times this last term. 1 times 16 is just 16. This negative 8 goes in the bottom. And then you need to find two numbers that multiply to give you 16 and add to give you negative 8. In this case, that is negative 4 and negative 4. Negative 4 times negative 4 is positive 16. Negative 4 plus negative 4 is negative 8. And then remember, we have to rewrite our equation. So instead of this negative 8x, we're now going to have x squared minus 4x plus 16. So these two pieces replaced our negative 8x in the middle. And then we have to group off our pieces. So first two numbers go into parentheses and the last two numbers go into parentheses. And then you have to pull out your GCF from each group. So in our first group, we have x squared minus 4x. Our greatest common factor is just x. And so inside, we're left with x minus 4. In our second parentheses, remember that I had said in the past that that first term has to be positive. So that first term right now is negative, which means that we are going to have to pull out a negative. And then our GCF between 4x and 16 is 4. So then we are left with x minus 4 on the inside. Remember again that these parentheses need to match. If they do not match, go back, double check that you did everything correctly, because if they don't match, something went wrong. So we take these outside terms and put them in parentheses, and then those matching parentheses, those come down as their own. Now, remember with this one, since we did not have a term in front of the x squared, I did teach you the shortcut way of how to factor this. You just take your two terms here from your x minus 4 times x minus 4. That's totally fine, but this long method does come back up, which is why I'm going to continue going through examples this way, because I need to make sure that you remember how to do it. And then finally, our last step, because we are trying to find the solutions, that means we have to set x minus 4 equal to 0. Both of these parentheses are the same, so we do not have to do it twice. We just have to do it one time. We add 4 to both sides, and we get x equals 4. You do not have to write x equals 4 twice, just the one time is plenty. All right, so we're going to do another one very similar to that. So again, first step, we have to get that right-hand side to equal 0. So we're going to subtract 10x and add 18 to both sides. So we will have x squared minus 10x plus 25 equals 0. So again, we have to multiply those first terms and last terms to get the top of our x, which just gives us 25. And this negative 10 goes in the bottom. Two numbers that multiply to give us 25 and add to give us negative 10 are negative 5 and negative 5. We rewrite our equation. Remember that negative 10 becomes the two side pieces of our x, but the x squared and the 25 just come straight down. We put the first two terms in parentheses and the last two terms in parentheses. In the first set, x squared minus 5x, our GCF is x. And we're left with x minus 5 on the inside. In our second set of parentheses, we have negative 5x plus 25. That first term is negative, so that means we have to pull a negative out. And between 5 and 25, our GCF is 5. So then we're left with x minus 5 on the inside. And so again, we double check that our parentheses match, and they do. So we take those outside terms to be a parentheses and those inside terms to be their own parentheses. And finally, our last step, we set those factors equal to 0. Again, notice they're the same, so we only have to do it once. So we add 5 to both sides, and we get x equals 5. So this is how we go about solving these problems using the zero product property whenever we are given an equation that we have to factor and then set the pieces equal to 0 to solve. But in some cases, we are given real-world situations where they give us an equation and they tell us what it represents, and we kind of have to solve it. Still in the same manner, but you need to pay attention to kind of what the question is asking you. So in this next one, it says, you throw a ball straight up from a rooftop 384 feet high with an initial speed of 32 feet per second. They give you this function, s of t equals negative 16t squared plus 32t plus 384. And this describes the ball's height above the ground, s of t, in feet, t seconds after you throw it. The ball misses the rooftop on its way down and eventually strikes the ground. How long will it take for the ball to hit the ground? So s of t is the ball's height above the ground. So we want to know how long it takes for our ball to hit the ground. So at that point, our height is going to be 0, right? Because it's going to be at ground level. So we have 0 equals negative 16t squared plus 32t plus 384. So we need to solve this for t is what we need to do. So to do that, we are factoring our equation. Very first thing we need to do is see if we have a GCF, which in this case, we do. Negative 16, because again, that first term is negative, and we do not want it to be negative, so we need to factor that out. So 16 goes into 16 once. It goes into 32 twice, and into 384 24 times. So now, looking at this inside piece, this t squared minus 2t minus 24, we can factor that piece. So again, we have our x. We multiply our first term and our last term, which gives us negative 24. And negative 2 goes in the bottom. So we need two terms that multiply to give us negative 24 and add to give us negative 2. In this case, that's going to be negative 6 and positive 4. Negative 6 times positive 4 is negative 24, and negative 6 plus 4 is negative 2. So this negative 16 just kind of stays out front. And then we have t squared minus 6t plus 4t minus 24. So we group those first two and last two terms, and we have to pull out our GCF from each group. So t squared minus 6t, our GCF is t, so we're left with t minus 6 on the inside. And 4t minus 24, our GCF is 4, and we're left with t minus 6 on the inside. Again, our parentheses match, which is exactly what we needed to happen. So we end up with t plus 4 times t minus 6. Remember, this negative 16 just kind of comes down and hangs out in the front. So this is the factored form of this equation. Negative 16 times t plus 4 times t minus 6. But we're still not done. We need to figure out how long it takes for the ball to hit the ground. So from here, we are setting t plus 4 equal to 0 and t minus 6 equal to 0. Subtract 4 from both sides, and we get t equals negative 4. Keep in mind, t represents time, so your time in seconds. Does it make sense for us to have negative 4 seconds from the time that this ball leaves the roof and hits the ground? It's not going to be negative time, so that is not going to work for us. But then over here, we have to add 6 to both sides, and we get t equals 6. Well, that means 6 seconds. So after about 6 seconds, this ball will hit the ground. All right, next one. This next one is a little tricky. So this next one says you can model the arch of a fireplace using the equation y equals x squared minus 28x plus 96, where x and y are measured in inches. The x-axis represents the ground. Find the width of the fireplace at ground level. So kind of imagine this is your fireplace, and here is your x-axis. So we need to figure out this point and this point to help us figure out what this width is on the ground. So to do that, again, we have to set y equal to 0, because at ground level, our y is going to be 0. So 0 equals x squared minus 28x plus 96. And again, now we have to go into factoring. So we have to make our x. Up top is 96, and on the bottom is negative 28. Two numbers that multiply to give us 96 and add to give us negative 28 are negative 24 and negative 4. So at this point, we rewrite our equation. X squared minus 24x minus 4x plus 96. We group the first two terms, group the last two terms, and we pull out our GCF from each one. So in the first group, our GCF was x. When you factor out that x, you're left with x minus 24. And in the second set, that first term was negative, so we have to pull out a negative. And our GCF was 4, so we pulled out a negative 4, which gave us x minus 24 on the inside. So again, parentheses match. So we have x minus 4 times x minus 24 is the factored form. This equals 0, so we set each of these equal to 0. X minus 4 equals 0. We add 4 to both sides. X equals 4. And x minus 24 equals 0. We add 24 to both sides. And we get x equals 24. So what that means is these 2 points on our x-axis are at 4 and 24. The whole question asked us to find the width of the fireplace at ground level. So that means your distance from 4 to 24, which is going to be 20 inches. It's a very small fireplace. All right, and then the last thing that we have to cover is solving equations by graphing. So this is actually very easy. It asks you to find the zeros of the function. Zeros of your function are just where your graph crosses the x-axis. So in number 1, we cross the x-axis here and here. So when x is 2 and when x is 4. And that's all it's asking. In number 2, we cross the x-axis here and here. So when x is negative 1 and when x is 3. And in number 3, the only place that we touch the x-axis is at negative 4. So x equals negative 4. And that is all for the notes for today.